You are told to forgive. Always. To find peace of mind, to let go, to be a good person. It sounds so simple, so desirable. But what if this advice, however well-intentioned, is sometimes not only wrong, but even harmful to your psyche? What if there are situations, people or actions where forgiveness is not the path to healing, but a form of self-betrayal, a denial of your deepest truth? What if the great depth psychologist Carl Gustav Jung left us clues that true mental health sometimes requires refusing to forgive, even if it hurts infinitely? Do not forgive these people when they do certain things, not out of hatred, but out of deep respect for your own soul and the rocky but necessary path to wholeness. Stay tuned, because we are now diving deep into a perspective on forgiveness that may shock you, but could ultimately set you free. We live in a culture that often glorifies forgiveness. From religious commandments to self-help gurus, we are told that holding on to resentment hurts us most, that forgiveness is the key to liberation from the past. And yes, there is a deep truth in this. Unprocessed anger, hatred, and desires for revenge can poison us internally and keep us trapped in the past. Forgiveness can be an incredibly powerful act of self-healing, a letting go of the chains that bind us. It can create space for peace, for new beginnings, for a lighter heart. We see inspiring stories of people who have forgiven the unforgivable and experienced profound transformation as a result. This is undeniable and admirable. But, and this is a big, often overlooked but, this narrative is incomplete. It ignores the complex depths of the human psyche and the conditions under which forgiveness is actually healing, and when it can become further injury. This is where Carl Jung's wisdom comes in. Jung was not a simple moral teacher. He was an explorer of the soul in all its complexity, with its light heights and dark depths. For him, the ultimate goal of psychological life was not simply happiness or peace at any price, but individuation, the lifelong, often painful process of becoming the unique, whole individual we are meant to be by nature. It is about recognizing, accepting, and integrating all parts of ourselves, the conscious and the unconscious, the pleasant and the unpleasant, the light and the shadow. And every life decision, including the decision to forgive or not to forgive, must be viewed in light of this overarching goal. Does it serve my individuation, my becoming whole, or does it hinder it? From this perspective, unconditional, hasty forgiveness is not always a sign of strength or spiritual maturity. Sometimes it can be a sign of weakness, of fear of conflict, of a refusal to acknowledge the painful truth of a situation, or of an unconscious identification with the role of victim. It can prevent us from setting necessary boundaries, recognizing our own worth, and learning the lessons that a painful experience wants to teach us. Jung would urge us to look closely. Are we forgiving from the strength of our true self, the center of our wholeness, which also knows and has integrated darkness? Or do we forgive from the weak, conformist ego that only strives for external harmony and ignores inner truth? Do we forgive because we have learned the lesson and integrated the wound, or because we are afraid of pain and confrontation? To understand when not forgiving can be psychologically necessary. From Jung's point of view, we need to take a closer look at some of his key concepts. As mentioned, there is individuation. Anything that promotes this process of becoming oneself is psychologically healthy. Anything that blocks it, such as clinging to illusions, denying one's feelings, or crossing one's own boundaries out of false compliance, is unhealthy. Then there is the shadow. The shadow is the part of our psyche that contains everything we reject in ourselves, everything we don't want to admit, everything that doesn't fit into our idealized self-image, our fears, our aggression, our greed, our weaknesses, but also our unlived potential. The shadow exists not only within us, but also in others and in the collective. A crucial task of individuation is to confront one's own shadow and integrate it. If we are too quick to forgive someone who has hurt us deeply, especially if they do not acknowledge or change their shadow-like behavior, we risk two things. We ignore or deny the shadow in the other person and may even enable them to continue their destructive behavior. And we ignore or suppress our own shadow. For example, our justified anger or pain, which actually wants to give us important information about the hurt and our boundaries. True forgiveness, from Jung's point of view, can often only happen after the shadow, in the perpetrator and in the victim, has been acknowledged and at least partially integrated. Another important concept is psychological integrity. Our psyche needs healthy boundaries in order to function and grow. Repeated or severe injuries can break through these boundaries and damage our inner structure. Sometimes, not forgiving is a necessary act to restore these boundaries and protect our psychological integrity. It is a signal to ourselves and to the world, this far and no further. This injury was real, and I will not pretend it was not. Ultimately, Jung saw suffering not only as something negative that needed to be eliminated as quickly as possible. He recognized that suffering is often an inevitable part of life and a powerful catalyst for psychological growth and awareness. Deep suffering can force us to grapple with existential questions, rethink our values, develop new strengths, and ultimately reach a deeper level of ourselves. If we simply cover up a deep wound with hasty forgiveness, we may rob ourselves of the chance to find the deeper meaning and transformative power of that experience. Sometimes we need to endure the pain of not forgiving for a while in order to honor the full truth of the situation and learn the lessons that life is trying to teach us. With this Jungian toolbox, we can now identify specific situations in which saying no to forgiveness is not only understandable, but psychologically necessary for our individuation. Remember, this is not about rigid rules, but about deeply and honestly feeling into your own truth. The first and perhaps most obvious situation is ongoing abuse or repeated serious harm without genuine remorse or behavioral change on the part of the perpetrator. Imagine someone repeatedly manipulates you emotionally, chronically cheats on you, systematically abuses your trust, or uses physical or verbal violence. If this person shows no sincere remorse, takes no responsibility, and above all, does not fundamentally change their behavior, then forgiveness in this context would not only be naive, but self-destructive. It would be like saying to someone who repeatedly hits you, "It's okay, go ahead." You would be validating the other person's shadowy behavior and endangering your own psychological and often physical safety. Your anger, your pain, your sense of betrayal are important signals from your psyche that say, "Danger, boundary crossed, protect yourself." Ignoring these signals and forgiving because you should forgive would be an act of self-denial and would massively hinder your individuation. It would mean closing your eyes to reality and letting yourself down. In such cases, not forgiving is often the first necessary step to draw clear boundaries, break free from the destructive dynamic, and restore your psychological integrity. It is not about hating the other person, but about loving and protecting yourself. Only when the harm stops and a genuine change in the perpetrator becomes apparent can there be any room for a process of forgiveness. But even then, it is not guaranteed or forced. A second, closely related situation is the denial of reality by the perpetrator, often in the form of gaslighting. Gaslighting is a particularly insidious form of manipulation in which the perpetrator attempts to systematically undermine your perception of reality. They deny that the incident took place, you're imagining things, twist the facts, it was completely different, accuse you of being oversensitive, you're exaggerating, or even blame you, you provoked me. If you try to forgive under such circumstances, perhaps to end the conflict or save the relationship, you are forcing yourself to betray your own perception, your own feelings, and your own memory. You accept a lie as truth in order to buy superficial peace. This is extremely harmful psychologically. It leads to cognitive dissonance, self-doubt, and a feeling of going crazy. It undermines your confidence in your own judgment and thus your mental stability. Jung would say that you are sacrificing the truth of yourself on the altar of a false peace sought by the ego. In such cases, not forgiving is an act of self-assertion and loyalty to your own reality. It means saying, I know what I experienced, I know what is true for me, and I will not pretend otherwise just to make you feel better or to keep the peace. Holding on to your truth, even if it means not forgiving, is crucial for integrating the experience and maintaining your psychological integrity. Forgiveness can only become an option once the truth has been acknowledged. Third, there are hurts that run so deep that they feel like a violation of your soul or a betrayal of your deepest core values. These can be traumatic events, existential betrayal by someone close to you, or acts that fundamentally violate your sense of justice or moral convictions. In such cases, asking for forgiveness can feel like trivializing the experience, like disregarding the depth of the pain and the significance of the incident. It can feel like you have to betray a part of yourself, your values, your soul in order to forgive. Jung would understand that such wounds take time to heal, and that the healing process does not always have to result in forgiveness. Sometimes healing involves acknowledging the severity of the injury, allowing yourself to feel the pain and anger, and learning to live with the fact that something unforgivable, from your current perspective, has happened. This does not mean remaining bitter. It means honoring the reality of the wound and integrating it into your life story without sugarcoating it. It can be a long process to find a form of acceptance. Acceptance that it happened, acceptance that people are capable of such acts, acceptance that the world is not always fair. This acceptance is not the same as forgiveness. It can lead to inner peace without excusing the perpetrator or trivializing the act. Sometimes acknowledging the unforgivable is the only way to preserve the depth of one's soul and the meaning of one's values. A fourth danger lies in hasty, superficial forgiveness, which often serves to avoid the painful process of dealing with the hurt. When someone hurts us, it often triggers a cascade of difficult emotions: anger, sadness, pain, fear, perhaps even shame or guilt. These feelings are unpleasant, and it is human to want to avoid them. Forgiveness can then seem like a quick escape, a band-aid that you stick on the wound so you don't have to look at it anymore. We quickly say, I forgive you, perhaps even to ourselves, to end the inner turmoil. But from Jung's point of view, this is psychological bypassing. We skip the necessary phase of confronting the pain and the shadow that has been activated by the hurt. Anger, for example, which is often seen as negative, is an important, vital energy from Jung's point of view. It shows us where our boundaries have been violated and mobilizes strength for self-assertion and change. When we suppress anger in order to forgive quickly, we cut ourselves off from the strength and allow the injury to fester unresolved in our system. It is similar with grief over loss of trust, security, and illusion. It must be lived through and mourned so that healing can take place. True forgiveness can only come at the end of such a process of working through, not at the beginning. It is the result of feeling the pain, learning the lessons, and integrating the experience. Premature forgiveness, on the other hand, is often just a defense mechanism, a form of denial that prevents real healing and can cause the wound to reopen later in other ways. Fifth, forgiveness can also be misused as a means of maintaining a false facade or persona, leading to profound self-alienation. Our society, certain religious communities, or even our own families can exert enormous pressure to forgive. Sometimes, not being able to forgive is seen as a sign of weakness or immaturity, To escape this pressure, to maintain the image of the good, spiritual, or strong person, the persona, as Jung would call it, some people force themselves to forgive, even though they are still full of resentment, pain, or resistance inside. They say the right words, perhaps even show a willingness to reconcile on the outside, but their inner world is in turmoil. This creates a deep rift in the psyche, a split between conscious behavior and unconscious feelings. This state of inauthenticity is deeply unhealthy. It consumes enormous psychological energy to maintain the facade and often leads to subliminal resentment, passive-aggressive behavior, or even psychosomatic symptoms. The ego tries to maintain control and live up to social expectations, but the self, the core of truth, is betrayed. True forgiveness can never be forced, either from outside or from within. It must grow organically from a process of inner healing and integration. If forgiveness is just a mask to meet the expectations of others or to protect one's idealized self-image, then it is not a virtue, but an obstacle on the path to individuation. In such cases, it is more honest and ultimately more healing to admit that one cannot yet forgive and to deal with one's true feelings. Finally, there are situations, especially in the context of serious injustice, crime, or systemic violence, in which an excessive emphasis on personal forgiveness can overshadow the need for justice and consequences. For example, if someone is the victim of a crime, personal forgiveness may at some point be part of the healing process, but it must not lead to the perpetrator not being held accountable or to the social structures that enabled the crime to be ignored. Jung also spoke of the collective shadow, the dark, destructive forces at work in societies and institutions. Sometimes, confronting this collective shadow requires clearly naming injustice and demanding consequences in order to prevent further victims and initiate healing change. An attitude that focuses solely on individual forgiveness and neglects the need for justice and structural change can unintentionally contribute to perpetuating destructive patterns. It is about finding a balance. Personal psychological healing is important, but it should not come at the expense of truth or responsibility to the community. Sometimes the courageous act of standing up, bearing witness, and demanding justice, even if it is painful and does not involve personal forgiveness, is an important contribution to healing the collective shadow. So, what does it mean, from this deep psychological perspective, to not forgive? It is crucial to understand that this does not automatically mean wallowing in hatred, bitterness, or thoughts of revenge. These would also be destructive emotions that bind us to the past and the perpetrator and damage our own soul. Hatred and revenge are often expressions of the unintegrated shadow. Not forgiving, in Jung's sense, is something more subtle, more conscious. It can mean acknowledging the truth. You stop minimizing or denying the hurt. You acknowledge the reality of what happened and the depth of the pain it caused. You stand by your perception. Setting boundaries, you make conscious decisions to protect yourself from further hurt by the same person or similar situations. This may mean breaking off contact, establishing clear rules for interaction, or avoiding certain topics. It is an act of self-care and self-respect. Refusing reconciliation. You make a conscious decision not to return the relationship to its previous state or to trust again until there has been a fundamental change or reparation. Reconciliation is different from forgiveness and often requires the involvement of both parties.